Chapter 6. The origins of the Gunthian Gate were a mystery to all. It is said that the Gunthians existed in a time even before the Heiligans and the Krishish. To this day, it is still unknown what happened to the Gunthians or how they died out. Their legacy, however, survived, with their many gates found on planets in all corners of the universe, many of them still in working condition. Inside a cave near Dreg stood one of these Gunthian gates, whose existence was known only by a select few. The cave lay inside one of the area's massive cone structures, but only the base of this one had remained, while the top part had long ago fallen to the ground and broken to bits, its remnants still littering the barren ground. Inside the cave, the gate stood tall, consisting of 3 large pillars in the shape of a doorway. They were made out of a black metal, with subtle inscriptions and glyphs running along all sides. On one pillar, there was a glossy panel, where one placed the scroll that activated the gate. A low hum filled the air inside the cave, even when the gate was not activated. The white sand inside the cave was for the most part undisturbed. Only Phalaris's weak old footprints disturbed the otherwise flat surface. A rare crow soared in the sky above, observing the 2 incoming parties. One moved quickly and left a trail of dust in the air, while the other consisted of 3 red figures, approaching slow and steady, weaving in between the fallen rock debris and closing in on the cave. Suddenly, the fast-moving party stopped. "I'm sorry, sir. We need to walk for a little while," panted the main runner, bringing the cart to a halt. The desert was hot, and the runners took a quick drink of water from their skins and began to walk the cart forward. The observer looked displeased, but held his tongue. Kvar, still wearing his goggles and miner's helmet, drank a gulp of water, then looked ahead. Uli had somehow managed to fall asleep. The old man smoked his pipe and shrugged at the runner's announcement. He was surprised they had made it this far without a break. After 5 minutes, the runners began to jog, and the cart picked up speed again. They reached the bottom of the decapitated cone shortly thereafter. "Thank you for your speed. Your services are no longer required," said Kvar, dismounting the carriage. Uli awoke and tried to orient himself, while the observer scanned the horizon in the other direction. The runners turned the cart around and began to walk back towards Dreg. Phalaris took a deep breath and began climbing the big sand dune towards the opening of the cave. The others followed. There was a wave of relief when they entered the cave as the cool air washed over them. The observer pulled out a fireless lantern, illuminating the path in front of them, which descended and winded about wildly, forking off every few minutes. They came to an opening and entered into a large chamber. The lantern adjusted automatically to the new area. In the back third of the chamber stood the gate, its tall pillars casting long shadows before it. "Ready to get off this hellhole?" asked Phalaris, moving quickly towards the panel on the gate. He withdrew a tube from his pocket, pulled out the scroll, and unrolled it. He tapped the panel a few times, and a light flashed across briefly. Phalaris then pressed the scroll against the glossy panel and held it there. A light could be seen sweeping across the document from underneath. There was a loud click, which caused everyone but Phalaris to flinch. He took the scroll down, put it back in the tube, and returned it to his coat. On the panel, a jumble of glyphs and symbols flickered by. The gate began to rumble. Then the panel flashed green for a few seconds. "Eperonk has accepted us," smiled Phalaris. The inscriptions that dug into the black metal began to emit a bluish hue. There was a series of 6 clangs, and beams of light connected the gap between the pillars. The beams became thicker with time, and after a few minutes, there was a solid wall of light. There was a loud whooshing sound, and a silver screen swept across the gate, rippling like water. "The gate is open. Let's go," pointed the observer. "Lead the way," replied Kvar. Phalaris hesitated. He had hoped the Drazian wouldn't make this difficult. Then the solution appeared behind the Drazian. "Relg," he yelled, pointing. The men turned towards the entrance and watched as the Relg walked into the cave. Then, for the first time in 3 days, the Relg stopped their march. There was a moment of silence and anticipation as the metal beast stared down their target. The old man broke it and bolted for the portal, diving through headfirst. The silver screen sucked him in, and he was gone. "Let's go," yelled Phalaris. Uli looked at the Relg, then Kvar. "Yeah, I agree with him." Kvar turned towards the observer. "Did you really think I couldn't read Heiligen?" The Drazian kicked Phalaris in the gut, launching him through the gate. Uli froze mid-step and looked back at Kvar, confused. There was a sound of metal clinking. The Relg stalkers were advancing. "I don't have time to explain, but we need to fight them," said Kvar. "Are you crazy? That's impossible. I'm going through." "Uli," he quieted his voice. "We just need to get them through the portal, and I will close it behind them." Uli looked around wildly for a few seconds. The Relg were close now. He drew his sword and walked back to Kvar. "At least if I die, it'll be an honorable death," he muttered. His eyes did not hold their usual confidence. The Relg stopped for a second and turned to look at each other. They were not expecting a fight. In unison, each pulled out a staff, then proceeded forward. Uli tossed Kvar his other sword. "I think that would be more useful in this circumstance." One of the Relg rushed forward. Kvar swung his sword, crashing it into the Relg's staff. He drew it around and swung again and again. The Relg reacted quickly, effortlessly, meeting each strike with the smooth fluidity of a dance. With one hand, Kvar grasped the staff and swung with the other, crashing the sword into the Relg's red armor. It rebounded off the Relg so quickly that it flew out of Kvar's hand. A tingling sensation ran up and down the Drazian's arm. The Relg ejected his hand forward in a short, lightning-fast burst to Kvar's chest. The Drazian flew backwards, skidding in the sand all the way up to the gate. He looked up and saw his arm only inches from the gate. He looked back at the Relg who had hit him. "Not quite," said Kvar. The Relg attached his staff to his belt and lowered himself slightly. Then he bounded full speed at Kvar, who was still on his back next to the gate. Kvar's eyes widened. The Relg dropped his hands to the ground, running it through the sand, and reached for Kvar. The Drazian's eyes glowed white, and sand spurted from underneath the Drazian's body, and he dropped into a small pit. Kvar watched as the Relg flicked by, its hand gliding just over his face, then disappearing into the silver screen. Meanwhile, Uli had been fighting the other two Relg. Never in his life had he thought he would have to fight a Relg, much less two of them. He was a skilled swordsman, but the Relg's purpose was war. By the graces of the gods, or just pure luck, he landed a strong kick on one's abdomen, launching the Relg off into the corner of the cave. The other Relg activated his staff, which began to emit a red glow from the top. Every time Uli's sword made contact with the Relg's staff, he was showered in sparks from the glowing red orb thing on the top. The Relg began to move faster than Uli could keep up with. Then it came. Uli missed the block and was hit on the shoulder. The blast seared Uli's skin and sent him flying. He landed face down on the sand a short distance away. Kvar had climbed out of the hole just in time to see Uli get hit. The Relg started marching towards him. The Drazian took out his boomerang and threw it full power. It bounced off the Relg's armor like a pebble. Kvar brought it back again and again, trying different points of attack, but each strike ending in the same result. The Relg stalker proceeded, undaunted. Finally, Kvar sent the boomerang at the staff and hit the glowing red orb. There was a loud crash and he lost control of his boomerang. He looked up at the orb, which was emitting sparks and a hissing sound. The Relg had stopped and was also looking at the orb. When he looked back, Kvar took a step back, uncontrollably. The stalker then began to walk forward, stomping his foot into the ground with each step, creating a minor shockwave and shaking the entire room. The third Relg got up and approached the Sirak, still face down in the sand. He reached him in a few seconds and lifted his leg over Uli's back, preparing to crush it. In a quick blur of movement, Uli flipped around and with full force landed a kick on the Relg's one standing leg. The Relg fell to the ground hard, and Uli rolled to the right to dodge the heavy hulk. The Sirak got up, grabbed the Relg, and lifted. The metal beast was extremely heavy, and he could only lift his torso off the ground a few feet. With all his strength, he rammed the Relg headfirst into the cave wall. It dropped to the ground and stayed there. Uli turned and saw the other Relg only a few steps away from Kvar, who held his boomerang with a shaking arm. Summoning all his energy, Wooly dropped his stance and charged in full sprint. Kvar blocked the first swing with his boomerang, but the force of the strike knocked the boomerang out of the Drazian's hand. He was once again backed up to the silver gate. The Relg raised its staff. A blur of movement came in and collided with the Relg, pulling it into the portal. Wooly and the Relg were gone. Kvar looked around and saw the last Relg laying on the ground. Damn, Wooly, you got two of them. Kvar scrambled over to the glossy panel. The Drazian punched in a few glyphs and waited. The silver screen dematerialized along with the beams. Then he pulled out the dagger he had bought in Dreg. He opened the hilt, which was on a hinge, revealing a secret compartment in the sheath. He reached inside and pulled out a worn piece of paper. "I hope this relic still works," he said. Then he flattened it as much as he could and pressed it against the glossy panel. He waited for a few seconds before the light finally scanned the paper. The same sequence happened as it did before. Glyphs started to move quickly across the panel, and the gate's hum grew louder. This time, the panel went completely yellow. Kvar manually inputted a few glyphs and submitted them. The panel then turned green and continued its processes. The Drazian once again entered in a manual sequence and submitted them. 1 minute timer for you, he muttered to himself. He heard the 6 clangs as the light beams materialized and turned to the gate. Standing in front was the last Relg. Fuck. Kvar walked over to face the last Relg stalker. He was pissed, sick of always being a walking bounty, running from mercenaries, the Relg, and the Federation. He hated hiding, and most of all, this last Relg who stood before him. The Drazian bent to the ground and put his hands onto the sand. He looked up and stared at the Relg with his double-ringed eyes, then went into deep thought. Nothing happened. Kvar tried again, but couldn't summon his other self. "Come on," he muttered. "Work!" He heard the gnashing of metal and saw the Relg beginning to advance on him. Kvar looked around for his sword, but it was nowhere to be found. Then he reached for his boomerang and threw it at the Relg, aiming for its neck. It hit the target with a clang and began to return to Kvar, but the Relg was too fast and caught it. It stared at Kvar with its red eyes, taunting, then flung the boomerang into the portal, where it disappeared. The Relg took another step forward. Kvar felt around his robes, looking for anything that could help. His hand felt a strange lump, and he took out a roll of cloth. Then, with dread, instantly remembered. The Krishish wrench. There was no other choice. He slipped his hand into the cloth and wrapped his fingers around the hilt and pulled out the black, tri-edged blade. The Drazian charged the Relg and plunged the Krishish wrench forward. The stalker's eyes reacted to the sight of the blade and began backstepping. Kvar lunged, and the triangular black metal pierced the Relg's breastplate. There was a blinding flash, and Kvar felt a burning pain ripple throughout his body as he spun uncontrollably, inadvertently pulling the Krishish wrench out. The momentum carried them both backwards and into the portal. There was a strange sensation of squeezing through a membrane, and then all was black.